Got this started. Oops.
I'm Lisa Gross. I'm the founder of the League of Kitchens. So in recent years, New York City has experienced the largest wave of immigration since the early 1900s. Close to 36% of the city's residents are currently foreign-born, and the number is even higher in Queens. It's 47%. And Queens right now is actually statistically the most diverse urban area in the world, with people from close to 100 countries speaking over 138 different languages. And yet, there are often very few opportunities for meaningful interaction either between immigrant groups or between immigrants and non-immigrants. And most interactions are service-based. It's the guy at the bodega, it's the waiter at the restaurant, the person at the dry cleaners. So the League of Kitchens seeks to shift this conventional dynamic. We are a new cooking school in New York City where all of our teachers are immigrants who are amazing home cooks, and they all teach their workshops in their own home kitchens. We actually launched just about exactly a year ago. So we currently have 8 instructors. We have Sunny from Korea, Yamini from India, Nawida from Afghanistan, Jeanette from Lebanon, Dolly from Trinidad, Mirta from Argentina, and Afsari from Bangladesh. Oh, and Despina from Greece. How can I forget her? So we currently have 2 main offerings. We have a 5.5-hour immersion workshop and a 2.5-hour taste of workshop. The immersion workshop starts with a lunch, covers 5 to 6 dishes, and ends with a full dinner. The 2.5-hour taste of workshop covers 2 to 3 dishes, starts with a snack, ends with a light meal. But all of our workshops have just 5 to 6 students, and everybody goes home with a packet of professionally written recipes and a shopping guide to the instructor's favorite shops. So in the League of Kitchens, the instructor is the expert, the teacher, the host, the cultural ambassador. This is not a service experience. This is a participatory experience where everyone cooks together, eats together, cleans up together, and shares their own stories and expertise throughout the day. So to give you a bit of a sense of what our workshops are like, we have some photos from our 2 newest workshops, our Trinidadian workshop and our Argentinian workshop. So this is Dolly's home in South Ozone Park. Students are making bus-up-shut roti. Here's a student learning to make it with her paddles. Here's the roti. And this is actually her separate outdoor kitchen where you see here she's making her goat curry. There's the goat curry. It's really amazing. And then everyone eating together at the end of the workshop. So here we have Argentinian cooking with our instructor Mirta, who lives in Forest Hills. This is her welcome spread. They're cooking together now. They're making alfajores, these amazing cookies. More alfajores making. The final meal, incredible chimichurri with short ribs, salad, lots of really good stuff, and then sharing the meal together. So the origin of the idea was actually in my own experience. Here's me with my parents. So my mother is a Korean immigrant. She immigrated to the US in the 1970s. My father is American of Hungarian Jewish descent. And when I was growing up, my Korean grandmother lived with my family. And she would cook all of this amazing Korean food all the time. But whenever I would want to help her or show interest in the kitchen, she would say, oh, don't worry about cooking. You should go study, because studying is more important. And for her, you know, she didn't really highly value her own cooking skills and really wanted me to have opportunities that she didn't have. And so because of that, I never learned to cook Korean food from her. And then when I graduated from college and was living on my own and really fell in love with cooking, and I wanted to cook Korean food, she had passed away by that time. And my mother doesn't know how to cook Korean food for the same reason, and so I tried to teach myself from the internet and from cookbooks, but nothing ever tasted as good as when my grandmother made it. And I think that's because what I realized was that there are often subtle but very important differences in technique or method or ingredients that really elevate a dish from good to great. And those are the things that you really need to learn from a person. And so I had this thought, this fantasy of, oh, you know, since my grandmother had passed away by this time, if I can't cook with my grandmother, I wish that there was another Korean grandmother that I could cook with and learn her family recipes and cook with her in her own kitchen. And that became this idea of, you know, we're in New York City. It's this incredibly diverse place. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could go into the home kitchens of cooks from all over the world and really learn their family recipes? And then this idea, as I developed it more, really became equally about using food and cooking as a way to create a meaningful opportunity for interaction and connection and cross-cultural learning and exchange. So we find our instructors in a variety of ways. We use Craigslist, we do a huge amount of community outreach. We also sometimes find people through word of mouth. And actually, to find our first 6 instructors, we interviewed close to 150 people and did about 25 in-home cooking auditions. And that's because we're really looking for someone who's very special and unique. And that's someone who's not just a good home cook, but a really amazing home cook. And we're looking for someone who's very warm, who's open, who's comfortable sharing their story, who's comfortable hosting groups of American strangers in their home, and who has an aptitude for teaching, because teaching cooking and being a good cook, probably as many of you know, is often a very different thing. And that's why we also offer about 50 hours of paid training to really work with our instructors to help them to become better teachers of cooking. So our instructors actually have a wide range of stories. Let me see if I can just click back for a second. So Despina, our Greek instructor, came to the US in the early 1970s as a nurse, got married, had 2 daughters, and actually one of her daughters now runs a very hip Greek food stand in the Essex Street Market called Babuki, which maybe some of you have been to, using her mother's recipes. Let's see. And Nawida, our Afghan instructor, came to the US 4 years ago with her young son to escape an abusive marriage. And she actually first found work as a hotel housekeeper. But in Afghanistan, she was responsible for cooking 3 meals a day for a household of 35 people. And she always says, well, usually there were a few guests, like 5 or 6, but whatever, that was pretty normal. So, all of our instructors have these stories where cooking was a huge part of their life growing up, and they really learned from their mothers and grandmothers. And I think another great example of this is actually our Korean instructor, Sunny, who's actually our oldest instructor. Nuida is our youngest instructor, but she cooks like she's 70. And Sunny is our eldest instructor in her 70s. And she came to the US in the early 80s with her husband, who was a Methodist minister, and their 2 teenage sons. She went on to become a social worker, to start a small Korean social service agency in Queens, which she still runs. And she really believes that cooking is the key to health. And so she is committed to growing as much of her food as she can for her family in her tiny backyard in Bayside. And she has 7 fruit trees, grows over 30 kinds of vegetables. And perhaps most impressively, she actually makes her own soy sauce and doenjang paste from scratch. So that's a Korean miso paste, and she makes it from soybeans and ferments it the traditional way in ceramic jars on her front stoop. So, and actually I was going to show a short video of Sunny made by Pure Eyes the World, which is online if you're interested, and you get to see her whole fermenting setup. And she also actually ferments her kimchi in traditional ceramic jars buried in the ground, and you can see that in the video too. So though our instructors have these different stories, there are a few things that really unite all of them. One is that they're all passionate about cooking, they love feeding people, and they really want to share their knowledge and expertise. They're also all really committed to traditional cooking techniques and methods and using high-quality, culturally specific ingredients. It's also really important that these are home cooks, these are not restaurant chefs. And that's because, as I've learned from our instructors, for many global cuisines, the fullest expression of the cuisine is really found in the home and not in a restaurant. And that's sometimes because doing things the traditional way is either too labor-intensive or too expensive for a restaurant to do. But sometimes it's also because you might have a wonderful dish that's considered too humble or too ordinary, and therefore you would only find it in someone's home. And so we really design our teaching menus to feature some dishes that students may have had before, but the way the instructor prepares it is really special, and then some dishes that you can only really get in someone's home. And by doing the workshops in someone's home, you also really get to experience the cultural context of a cuisine. So for instance, Yamini, our Indian instructor, and Afsari, our Bangladeshi instructor, they teach all their students how to eat their meals with their hands. And for many Americans or people from other countries, they've never eaten South Asian food with their hands before, and it really changes your experience of that cuisine. Yamini also always makes an offering of the first plate of food on her home altar and really and chants a blessing over it, and always explains how her food and her cooking really relates to her spirituality and her religious tradition. Mirta, our Argentinian instructor, Mirta, and we saw her workshop earlier, She always starts her workshop with a mate ceremony. And she serves the mate in her collection of handmade mate cups and really explains how it's traditionally prepared, how it's shared, and the cultural significance and meaning of that. And lastly, by doing a workshop in someone's home, you really get to see the culturally specific tools they use, how they use and store their ingredients, but I think most importantly is this intimacy that's created and this sense of seeing the whole cultural picture around the food. So something very magical happens over the course of many of our workshops. In the beginning, they're always a little bit awkward. People often feel a little bit apprehensive. Maybe they're going to a new neighborhood they've never been to before. You're going into a stranger's home. But over the course of the workshop, connections are formed, and we often hear from our students that they feel like they've discovered a new favorite aunt or sister, and that some part of the world that formerly felt sort of abstract now feels very personal and real. And it's really food, it's cooking and eating together that is the catalyst for that shift. So thank you, and I hope you guys will check us out.